Yeah.
Okay, there we go. So, what is your opinion about what is so special about special education? Anyone could dive in to the conversation.
I guess I'll start because I started writing my notes down and I put for my two articles that I read, the legal history of special education, what a long, strange trip it's been, and the legislative and litigation history of special education. In my thoughts, I put special education is special because it provides those students with disabilities the educational opportunities and teachings like those of their non disabled peers. It allows them to have an educational program that, quote, related to the child's learning capacity, specially designed for the child's unique needs, and not merely what is offered to others and reasonably calculated to confer educational benefits. And then I found this quote in one of my articles that says, this quote is from Chief Justice Earl Warren for the Brown versus Board of Education 1954. It states, and these days it is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if he is denied the opportunity of an education. Such an opportunity where the state has undertaken to provide it is a right that must be available to all on equal terms. And I feel that quote a lot just like resonated with me. So I was like immediately highlighting it after I had read it. That it describes it's an inherent right for us. It's an inherent right for everybody. We have our equal rights. The laws, original laws, didn't say just for people who are not disabled. Our children are special. All children are special. And special education is just for our specialer kids. I'm going to do that funky wording in there. Um, to have an education that is unique for them. So to me, that's what makes special education special.
I feel like with me, special education is kind of very unique in its own way because of all of the process that they actually have to go through. First, like, with teacher identifying, like, oh, this student might need some, some more support that more than I could provide. And I think at that moment, like that teacher is kind of showing, like, I'm a teacher for this student, but I know that this student deserves more. So the first instance of that teacher identifying the student's needs is kind of like the beginning of like the uniqueness of what special education is. Yes, all of the laws that comes with it in terms of when they are deemed eligible for special educations and all of the process that goes with it, especially that they have like different steps that they have to follow, like the faith, the Free Appropriate Public Education Act, the IDEA Act, and all of the things that support them. It's kind of like they always have a backbone. And it's kind of like for us as special education teachers, we have something to kind of always check off our list. Like, are we providing this? Is this kind of like what is guiding? It's kind of like there's a guidance when it comes to our teaching with this with the population that we serve. So I feel like, yes, these are, students are babies, are the uniqueness, the special talents that they have, requires us to truly understand them, not just on the disability standpoint, but them as a whole being. So I think like all the laws and all the litigation that passed that kind of supported them, leads us to for them leads us to kind of like truly understand their needs, but at the same time they're feeling empowered that us we're educating ourselves and all of the things that goes behind the back end of special education truly support the students that we serve.
I agree with what both you ladies have to say about its special education is so unique in that it does focus more on the individual student or the individual with exceptionalities rather than just a group. I also like to say that for me, special education is special in a way that general ed isn't, is because special education requires a lot of collaboration. It's not just, here's your group of students, this is what you have to teach them. How you get there is up to you. It includes the parents, it includes service providers, it includes the student at times. It includes spectrum of staff sometimes as well. And for my articles, so the articles that I read were inclusion in K through 12 and higher education, and parents in litigation, insights from a special education law clinic. And both these articles kind of highlight that collaborative process, and that without it, the needs of our students aren't being met. And honestly, in a lot of ways, I do think that that collaborative process in special education we might be nice to carry over in other spaces in education, like general ed, because sometimes I feel like there's just a lot of like questioning of, well, what are you learning? But in special education, it's clear like this is what we need them to learn. This is what we would like them to learn. This is what the student wants to learn. How do we get there?
So I agree with that about the increased collaboration would be very beneficial. Um, so my articles focused a little bit on access to education as well as like 504s as well as IEPs. And what I find that is, special about special education is that every student with a disability who qualifies is entitled to their IEP, so their individual education plan. And I think what makes that so special is we're going to tailor their education to help them not only be placed in special education, but to ensure that they can reach ambitious and realistic goals and allow them to be successful in life and in school. And special education doesn't only focus on the academics. We also are focusing on life skills that they're not necessarily going to receive in general education classes. And like you said, that team collaboration that we see through special education is something that I personally feel would be beneficial if it was school wide, that everyone collaborated that much. But just knowing the team that is behind every special education student to create their plan, and to do what is necessary to help them be successful, I think is really like what makes special education what it is.
Okay, my turn, and I just want to apologize because my son is louder than I want him to be right now. But I agree with all of you guys about special education, how it is special. The articles that I chose were the role of law in ensuring access to special education, the views of teachers, and then the other one was the evolution of Connecticut special education. And it was a study. They went back about 15 years just to see how it's changed and the reforms that they've made. But and that one talks about who prevails in special education and why. And what I thought was interesting about the articles was that it said there was a correlation between how many special education students are identified in districts that receive free lunches. And the other one I thought was interesting. And it was because I like that it was from the aspect of teachers, because I don't think that a lot of times, I think a lot of other people make all these, suggestions and rules for things that they don't necessarily know what goes on in a classroom all the time. So that's why I chose those articles. But I don't know if I really answered the question of why is it special, but I just think that special education is special because the children are special and they're unique, and every situation is different, and what works for one student is not going to work for another student, and you have to pivot and you have to just tailor things, and make it special for that student. So that's what I think is special about it.
Actually, one of the article that I read kind of like highlighted like, so it's an article about like school principals being part of like that special education process, because like most of the time it's the special ed teachers that's part of it, right? We're the ones that's getting contacted about the IEPs and the progress report and things like that. And it's kind of like the school principals are kind of like on the back end of it, like, and depending on your school principal, how involved are they, how they are being, how are they seeing special education as a whole in the whole class, in the whole school, kind of like varies that. And it's interesting that, so this article that I read, School Principals and Student with Special Education Needs Leading to Inclusive Schools, it's kind of like, it's kind of sad sometimes, like if your school principal is not part of the process or like not supportive of the process. Like, yes, they're aware of that it's happening, but it's kind of as a whole school. If it's a school that only cares about the grades and the data and all of that things that what a gen ed student would be able to provide more than what a special ed, student would provide, it's kind of like they're becoming, if the school principal is not well versed into this, into the support that we are providing the student, it's kind of like, well, I'll just sign it off and you do as a sped, and so that's a burnt out for all of us, right? Like we all want administrators to be part of the process, to be part of, supporting the student first as well, and then supporting us in this process, because I feel like most of the time us special education teachers are the one that's carrying that burn, that kind of like burden of all of the paperwork that we need to do, yet the school principals are just kind of like signing it off and not really reading the reports and things like that. So this article kind of highlighted like the results of it kind of vary. So it's like an interview for like 13 school principals, and then like it depends on like their view of inclusion. It's kind of like we're all getting the training of special ed and things that's related to special ed, but them as school principals, they're not really like getting the full training of like what an AAC device is, or what is like, like other support that we provide, accommodations that we can provide for the students. Like, yes, they know the terminology, but they don't know how to, kind of apply it and things like that. So this article kind of like highlighted, like, it depends on like how the school principals view of special ed, which is kind of really sad. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to segue away from it, but I feel like that's kind of like how we sometimes feel like we're not getting the support that we want from the higher ups.
Right. I even think that some of the gen ed teachers too, because like I said, I was doing 7th and 8th grade resource last year, and I started in February of last year. And I couldn't believe how like the assignments that they were assigning the students, they weren't modified in any way. And I can say, well, I hate to say they can't do this. I don't ever want to say this, but they shouldn't be doing some of the work that they were assigned, and they weren't, given any kind of leniency or anything. And it was just, and so this year I was actually really happy that I found out that all of the teachers were going to get, a copy of the IEP. Not that they didn't have them already, but they were going to have, it's going to be like more of a focal point for them, and they'll be aware, and they're going to be, accountable if they're not, upholding what's in their IEP and modifying their lessons to them and differentiating their work. So I was very happy about that, because, I didn't want to burn any bridges last year and ruffle any feathers, but at the same time, like, that's our job. We have to be compliant with their IEPs, and you're not doing anything about it. So I'm happy to see that is being addressed this year.
All have a very much opinion on special education. I just want to point out that my Zoom is not like the pro kind, so I think we might get kicked off. So if it does happen, then I'll resend you guys the invitation again, if that's okay with you guys. Okay. All right, let's go with the second one. So the litigation legislation that influence the field of special ed.
I've noticed almost every single article that I've read has referenced the case of was it Andrew? Was it Andrew F? The student who his parents weren't they weren't satisfied that he was getting an appropriate education, and so they sent him to the private school, and then they sought to be reimbursed for the costs that incurred for sending him to a private school. So I think that has influenced, that case has been a huge influence in the field of special education. And oh, what did I find? Somebody else can go. I found something else really interesting, but let me just search for it. But somebody else
So
can share.
I'll go off of that because I actually read an article that was focused on the case of Andrew F. So essentially, my notes on that was litigation and legislation have shaped every part of special education. For example, the Rowley decision in 1982 set the original floor of some educational benefit. Later, Congress authorized IDEA to strengthen procedural protections and parent involvement. Then in 2017, Andrew F. raised the bar for what a free, appropriate public education requires. And these cases show how the courts interpret what Congress intended, and those interpretations change how schools operate. The teachers now have to document evidence-based interventions and track whether students are meeting appropriately ambitious IEP goals. So essentially, the laws provide the structure, and the litigation has pushed the field forward when families have challenged the schools and courts. And I believe that the laws and litigation and just the access to things nowadays that wasn't necessarily there early on, like in the 80s, and when we started moving away from like sending our kids away because they had disabilities, there's more access to information now. So parents and guardians are more aware, and can look up these litigations and the legislation and all that and come into meetings prepared to advocate for their kids, especially in the state of Connecticut. Our guide, which was also one of our assignments, really lays out the foundations for parents and guardians on what they are, allowed, gives recommendations on how to prepare for meetings and what you can do if you're not happy. It's definitely shaped the way special ed operates. The more people are advocating and kind of fighting back when their children are not receiving the services they need, the more stringent laws are becoming, but it's also bettering special education for everyone.
I'll go off, continue with that. And the articles I read, a lot of was talking about, like, I think it was the 1840s with the enactment of the compulsory laws that stated about attendance in schools. And that led into a lot of other people coming in other cases, state by state, which some of them were, two that kept popping up on mine were the, the Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Citizens, which became PARC, and the Mills versus Board of Education, that just was shortened down to Mills. PARC specified that all children with mental retardation between the ages of 6 and 21 must be provided a free public education, and that it was most desirable to educate children with mental retardation in a program most like the programs provided for their non-disabled peers. And then Mills clearly outlined the due process procedures for labeling, placement, and if a student had exclusion of a student with a disability. So those are certain state cases that eventually led into the foundations of IDEA and helped, instead of being just specific to the states, ended up becoming enacted laws for the country to hopefully follow. But there were still states and stuff that were trying to find loopholes and ways that they can get out of not able to provide the services for the students.
Going back to what I was saying before about the Andrew F. and case, I found it interesting in my articles that I read that it was saying how the board is winning more cases over parents' cases because what the Andrew F. case said was that so all the board must do is ensure the student in question is receiving at least some educational benefit. As long as the student is receiving some educational benefit, then they are not entitled to more services from the board. They are also not likely to receive tuition reimbursements if the student is enrolled in a private institution, since the parents were not pleased with the board's educational program. As long as the board's plan involves some educational benefit by law, they are not required to provide anything more. So that bothered me. That really bothered me because, just, I don't know. I think it's just I think sometimes the special ed is just doing, as long as they're checking off the boxes, then they're wiping their hands clean. And there's so much more to it. And that's why we just constantly need to advocate for our students. And I think, which is why, there's always going to be, new cases and new laws, and that's a great thing, I think.
To the one of the article that I read about like related service providers and them coming into the classrooms or like providing them in the school settings, where one of the litigation that happened in LV versus Nebo School District, of when students they didn't think related service providers are something that special education students are to be getting in their schools. Some of them still benefit from it, like OT, PT, speech. And because I guess there's something with the insurance or something with the funding that was happening, that they weren't able to get them the services, and then they're requiring them to have outside services, which I honestly I kind of disagree with that, because why can't we embed all of the related service into the routine of the students? Like a lot of parents that do outside services, it's kind of like another steps for them, another layer, if it's not getting provided in the school setting, because the district or the school or anything, there's misconception of what it could be in the school. So I think that idea of not providing it in the school is very much why. So I think
I
Go
can
ahead.
definitely personally attest to that one. Using my own children as an example, my son was nonverbal until he was 4, and